And sorry, is it just the audio that gets or does
This
the
will
video?
get up, the video will get uploaded
Okay.
to YouTube.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
Okay. Good. Hello, everyone. I am so glad you are here with me today, and I am so excited to have our guest today. We have Dr. Dayna Lee-Baggley coming in from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Hello, Dr. Dayna.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So excited to chat with you. We connected. I saw you on the ROI stage in California at Rachel Rogers conference, and you were given you were like in the hot tank, the Shark
Yes.
Tank almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just loved your message, and I love that there was another Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't too many of us there. I
Yeah.
loved being able to connect. But Dr. Dayna is a workplace psychologist, researcher, and author. And we're going to dive into we haven't touched on this topic on the podcast. And I really think it's important that we, dive into some of the work that you're doing that's really important, I think, for all of us to be aware of, and that we start to ask some of these questions that I think are really important. But where I like to kick off is with a question about feeling seen and heard. And when was the last time that you felt truly seen or heard in your work or in your life?
Well, I actually would definitely pull up ROI as an example of that. It's been so I'm a psychologist by discipline. We don't get a lot of business training. I used to work in the hospital in a unionized job, and I left after wave two for my own burnout reasons, but also because like the mental health needs of the planet had kind of exploded, and I was doing therapy for cancer patients, which is obviously a meaningful thing to do, but I was like, one-on-one therapy is not going to cut it anymore. And so I started a company. And so I run that company now, and we've pivoted to doing workplace psychology and workplace mental health. But I, had no business training whatsoever. And so I'd had partners in the past, some of them good, some of them not so good, who were sort of responsible for doing the business end of things for me so that I could be the subject matter expert. And it just kept not being what I wanted it to be. And so that's when I found Rachel Rogers and ROI and got connected to that community. And it's just such a lovely experience to be surrounded by women, by diversity. Like, I don't get a lot of that. I'm often the only female or the only BIPOC person in the room. And so that's a pretty unique opportunity to be surrounded by that many people who can really understand what you've gone through. So I have lots of really wonderful white male friends who are very genuine and very earnest in their efforts to help. And it's just, there are some things that I will never understand about being a white male, and they will never understand about being
Right.
a BIPOC female, right? And
Right.
so to connect with people who like get it right off the bat is just a really nice opportunity. And so you feel seen and heard because there's so many things you don't have to say. There's so many things you don't have to explain. They kind of just get it already.
I agree. And I think it also, when we remove that sort of barrier or that layer, the we can get right into it,
Yeah.
right? We can just like dive right in, and the conversations change in that kind of environment. And I know I'm just outside Calgary. I'm in a suburb of Calgary, which isn't terribly diverse. That, that was the first time I'd been in that at ROI, that diverse of a community.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It really was. So I love that that's where you felt seen and heard, because I think I challenge anyone listening to this to get in a room like that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
do. I challenge you to do it, because you learn so much. You learn from hearing other people, but you learn a lot about yourself being in that environment.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, they had a session on how to be the most, which I
Yes.
just adored because so many times we're told you're too much or you're not
Yep.
enough, right?
Yep.
And, especially like you're too loud, you're too this, you're too that. And to have a session on how to be the most was just like a really liberating idea, about,
Yeah.
and I think it's something important, for example, for women in the workplace, uh, so, for example, there's studies showing that women apologize more often in the workplace than men do. And so this narrative shows up where we say, oh, we should teach women they don't have to apologize so often, right? But what
Mhm.
if women are apologizing the exact right amount and men are not apologizing enough, right? So, what have we treated as normal? What are we treating as the point of reference? And so, there are lots of things that men are just going to do better, and women have their own ways of doing things that we should try to embrace and make use of rather than seeing them as disadvantages. So, an example of that is, women are often criticized more about their bodies or their clothing, right? But we also get to express ourselves a lot more through clothing. Like,
Right.
guys, your outfits are kind of boring. And I say that with kindness, right? But like, it's a dark suit with a white shirt. Like, they
Yeah.
are getting better at adding some color in there, but they're pretty limited in their options. Women have a lot of ways of expressing things through their
Right.
clothing. And so that's an example of how do we make use of something that is used against us often, right? As a way
Bingo.
of actually like, taking advantage of that and making use of it. And so I think that's something to sort of keep in mind.
It's flipping the script a little bit too,
Yeah,
right? Like, how do
exactly.
and I love that because I think, there is opportunities if we really like zone in and think about, okay, I can see how this, paints us in a certain light. How can I flip it and use it to my advantage?
Exactly.
Right? Ah, so let's dive in a little bit to your story, your arc, as we like to call it on this podcast. And how did you really get in like that transition from individual therapy of cancer patients to workplace psychology? That's kind of a they're very
Yeah.
different buckets.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was a unionized employee for most of my career, and now suddenly being an entrepreneur is like I'm not sure how further apart you could get, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is kind of an interesting story, and part of that was being really driven by my values. So I was experiencing a lot of workplace stress, and my health was suffering. And there were some, rules that exist in a large institution like that were really not well designed for pandemic times and were not well designed for employee well-being. And so I just felt like there was somewhere else I needed to express my values. The hospital had very much been a place where I was expressing my values and I felt really good about it. I was a health psychologist. I worked on the medical and surgery teams on cancer care, brain injury, and so it was like really meaningful work. But
Yeah.
suddenly, things had changed and I wanted to contribute in a different way. And so I was really thinking about how I wanted to show up, my values, and who I wanted to be, and what was important to me about how to contribute. I'd spend a lot of times, fixing people up in psychology, individual therapy, and then sending them back to toxic workplaces.
Right.
And we put so much burden on the individual. We do a lot of work on burnout, and the classic story is like that the individual, needs to do more self care, and that's how they will escape burnout, right? But that ignores the fact that the environment is actually something that needs addressing as well. And so I kind of thought, how can I fix environments that people are in? And workplaces are an amazing opportunity for that because there is a clear ROI for the employer as well for investing in employee wellness and employee mental health. The
Mhm.
stats say that for every $1 you invest in proactive mental health for employees, you get a $2 to $4 return on your investment. And so that's a great savings for employers. And so there's really this like win-win opportunity there when you get
Yeah.
people aligned with that. And challenge has actually always been one of my values too. I realized my sister will complain that I'm super competitive and I compete about things that are ridiculous to compete about. But I realized like I wasn't being challenged also, and I needed to do something new and different. So this was a big different, I would say,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was part of it. Is I'm not, as sort of I need to be challenged to learning new things and doing new things to kind of find excitement and joy in my life. And so that also, fed into that decision to change. It was certainly not without stress. I'm a single mom. I was leaving a unionized, pensionable, full-time job for, a very unpredictable salary. And so I describe those as rumble strips, as when you hit these like things, the discomfort of change. Because, when you hit rumble strips on the highway and it makes you go back to like the center of your lane. And when we're trying to do new things, that's kind of what our brain does to us, is it gives us rumble strips, whether that's uncertainty, unease. I don't know if I can do this. Is this the right thing? Right. If you're clear that this is a value driven move, then we expect to have rumble strips, right? Our goal actually isn't to get rid of the rumble strips, is to get better at going over them, to be more willing to experience discomfort in the service of your values. So there was a lot of work I had to do to let go of that stability of that job and that income, because I knew it was a value-driven move, and I was kind of willing to take that risk and willing to feel that uncomfortable. But I think people sometimes encounter discomfort and think that it means they're going in the wrong direction, but often it's exactly what is required to live a meaningful life.
And I really appreciate the work on the values. And I teach some business courses and whatnot, and we spend a lot of time on those core values, because I think it's not taught in many business courses, for one, but I'll tell you, it is your guiding light through everything you do. And if you get off of those values and say yes to something that isn't aligned, you actually have crossed over those rumble strips and are going to have to find a way to bring that all the way back, which is much harder than, oh, maybe I get up against. I love the rumble strip analogy, because you kind of hit it and it's like, oh, hold on, am I on the right path? Am I on the right path? Yeah. I love that also that it's like you've learned that you need to be challenged. And I think, I think those are questions that are okay to ask, as we, so few of us now are going to work in the same career for 50 years. And, I came from a background of disability management, so I totally get that investment, that ROI and investment of like, if we fix it in the workplace, maybe we don't have as many people on leave. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But I think, asking yourself, what are the things that you need? And it's probably going to change over the course of your working career.
Yeah. And so, values are part of the system, the evidence-based system that we use in all of our training and all of our work. And it has a very specific meaning, which I think aligns with what you're describing as well, which is like, how do you want to show up? Not necessarily, it's very much what you want to give to the world, not what you want to get from the world. And that's kind of important, because we have control over how we show up if we're willing to be flexible, meaning express different behaviors to express our values. Then you can always express your values. But if you're expecting the world to give you things, and that's the value, like the value is justice, which means that I should get justice for my harms, and the world owes me something, which of course is a very normal human thing to want, right? But you don't have control over that. And so when somebody says, justice is a value, I'm like, great, how are you going to contribute justice to the world? How are you going to add that to the world? How are you going to show up in a way that adds justice to the world, rather than how are you going to get it from the world? And so it's a much more empowering place to be, because that's the part we have the most control over, is our own behavior, not other people's behavior, not our thoughts and feelings, our behavior. And so that's the definition of values, which helps keep it that, not sticky, that we don't get stuck in like, I have to do this, or this must happen for me to be happy. It's about, okay, well, what's the next version of how I express these values, and how am I going to do that? Right? What's my contribution to that?
Yeah. And have you seen a real progression in your own values going, like really taking that leap? Like, so then you've got, you've found like challenge, and then like when you actually enter entrepreneurship from a perhaps unionized environment, then like you also you might learn a few new values that you didn't know you had or needed.
Yeah, for sure. And, we have values about, I have personal values about how I'm trying to show up in the world. Our company has values about what it's trying to do, right?
Yeah.
Your household can have values. You can have parenting values. And again, parenting values is not what you want your kid to be, right? It's about how you want to show up as a
Good
parent.
clarification.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, challenge, I think it was good that that was one of my values at that point in my life that I was, recognizing it. And different values have different importance throughout your
Right.
life. And that's totally
Yes.
okay. There's an expression about hold your values lightly, like different ones become different
Mhm.
levels of importance because there is so many new things to have to learn in entrepreneurship and so much kind of grit and resiliency and persistence that you need in order to keep going because there's many moments where you like almost have to be a little delusional of like it's gonna work. It's gonna
Just,
work. I'm gonna make
I'm
money.
gonna jump. I'm gonna jump.
Exactly, right? And so
Yeah.
hopefully you've done that with some guidance and expertise so you're making thoughtful jumps and
Right.
thoughtful moves as you
Yes.
put your faith into that, but it does require having a level of faith which is believing something when there's no proof of it, right?
Right.
And so you have to keep behaving when there is no proof that it's working. And so it was really important and I was very grateful to have some good mentors again through Rachel Rogers' program about which behaviors I should be doing so that I had more faith in those behaviors basically.
Right.
But yeah, it requires a different skill set. And I think sometimes people, forget that like
Yeah.
parenting requires a totally different skill set than often your job requires, right? And so the skills that make you awesome at your job sometimes make you not at all effective as a parent. And people get confused by
Exactly.
that, but it's because a different skill set is required. Same with like your interpersonal relationships. They're not going to function the same way as some goal oriented things work. And so
Right.
again, being value driven is really, I think, helpful way of changing perspective because there's no finish line with goals. You just move towards or away from them, right? But
Ex-
they're not done ever. And so I get really I think people mess themselves up a lot again, very not intentionally obviously, with treating relationships like with goals, like having goal driven relationships, and the
Mhm.
classic one being happily ever after, because that's very much a finish line, right? It's like, and then once you get to happily ever after, then you're good. And if anyone's ever gotten married, you know that that's
Uh,
just the beginning of something, right? So
yeah.
I'm a certified couples therapist and so saw hundreds of couples throughout my career. And you need to be value driven about how am I going to show up and how is this
Right.
relationship helping me show up, as opposed to like where is it going? Relationships don't go anywhere. They just are. They are about being. And so when we apply these goal driven ideas to
Mhm.
relationships, the relationships don't go well because you're waiting for
Right.
these markers, right? And of
Yeah.
course, you can hit markers like, decisions about commitment, like marriage. But as I said, being married does not guarantee you love. It doesn't guarantee you a partner. It doesn't guarantee you fidelity. It doesn't guarantee you secure attachment. None of those things are for sure when you get married. And so let's focus on the values instead about what kind of relationship are you trying to create? How do you want to show up in a relationship? That might include marriage, it might not, right? But
Mhm.
if you focus on the values, then you're definitely moving in that direction.
Oh, that's so much goodness in that for all aspects of our lives to consider. I've been married a long time, so yeah, here there is there there the end would be the end.
Yeah.
Like, so
Right.
why would we want to move closer to that, right? And I think that's a great like values really can be applied in any area of our life, and like you said, they will be different, and that's okay because we show up differently in different
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah. So sometimes when people, get divorced and they're like, my marriage failed. And like this one couple had been married for 22 years and they were getting divorced, right? And she would say, I have like my marriage has failed. I was like, really? Okay. Because by that definition, then the only way to have a successful marriage is if you die married. That's the definition of a good marriage? I just have to die married? Because it means any ending before death is
Right.
somehow a failure in marriage. How about the 21 years you were together were really amazing and awesome and helped you express your values and you did awesome things? And maybe the last year or leading up to the last year, then it wasn't It wasn't what you needed. It wasn't what your partner needed. It wasn't what your kids needed, right? And then you went over a really big rumble strip, hopefully with your values in mind about who you needed to be and what kind of
Yeah.
relationships you needed in your life to express that person, right? But
Yeah.
again, that's very goal-driven ideas that if it ends, it's somehow a failure, right? And
Yeah.
and so I encourage people to think differently about it. And also, especially younger generations who are not going to hit the same markers as older generations, right? The like, you get a degree and then you get a job with a pension and then you get a house and a dog and 2.4 kids. Like, people don't do that anymore. It's like so much harder to do that.
Changed.
And
Yeah.
it's not because they're not trying, it's because the world has changed, right?
Changed.
And
Yeah.
so it is very hard to hit those markers in the same way that older generations hit them. And so if you're being goal driven about these things that happen or don't happen, you're going to feel like a failure, as opposed to being value driven about what matters to me. How am I trying to show up? And man, especially because the world feels like a dumpster fire lately, right? It is
A
especially
little bit.
important to think about how you want to contribute and who
Yeah.
you want to be, right?
Yeah.
Because it really matters now. It really matters what we put out in the world, right? You will never stop hatred with hate. And so, what are you putting out in this dumpster fire to help things be better and to help it be the world you want to see?
Yeah. Oh, so much goodness in that. So I want to shift now a little bit to the hive aspect. And we were going to talk a little bit, let's maybe talk a little bit about like leadership, inclusion, and really let's talk about workplace, because I think, you know, we we have a we are in a society right now, and I think if we listen to the first part and think about values, and then think about, how we are showing up in a workplace, how we are leading, and maybe, how leaders aren't being trained to lead well, or just getting thrown into leadership roles without any training. you know for you, how in your, let's start in your own company and then we'll get to maybe the bigger, but how have you been able to create opportunities for diverse leadership in your company, that maybe includes visible and invisible diversity?
Yeah. So we actually, do work with companies on DEI kind of things. We often describe that as belonging because we don't want to treat
Love that.
DEI like a zero sum game, right? If you
Yeah.
end up treating it like we're going to increase these people, their sense of inclusion, and at the expense of these people now feeling excluded, like that's not inclusion. It's not a zero sum game. Everyone can actually feel more included. And so we often talk about belonging and we talk about visible and invisible forms of diversity, right?
Mhm.
For sure, if you have a visible form of diversity, I'm, half Chinese. My dad's an immigrant from Hong Kong. And so if you have a visible form of diversity, you don't get a choice about whether you want to, reveal it or not, right? The world is going to treat you that way no matter what. But there are many forms of invisible forms of diversity, and there are many ways people are diverse, right? And so we should not just be relying on what people look like as the only form of diversity. Um, I think in our own company, again, we try to be value driven about how we're doing that. Most of my company is actually made up of women, many of whom are single moms. Many are BIPOC as well,
Mhm.
and part of I think the biggest role I can play is actually just being a role model for them, right? Of demonstrating that it's possible to be in leadership, demonstrating it's possible to
Mhm.
make money, demonstrating it's possible to run a company. And I think by just living that out and letting them see the struggles as well as the successes, that they start to see that as possible then, right? It's like that expression, if I see it, I could be it. And that we sometimes need those examples. I think it really also, we have a very narrow definition of leadership, right? It has been defined
Mhm.
by certain people who want to maintain that status quo. We have these like traditional triangle pyramid kind of structures to organizations. That's not the only way to lead, right? That's not the only way to be a leader. And so I think it's also that when you get into positions of power, is how can we alter it, right? How do you alter the structure? So I always kind of say I'm kind of an infiltrate person as I play the game for as long as I need to get to a place where then I can change the game, right? And that benefits a lot of people. Again, many people are harmed by the patriarchy. It's not just women. Many men are harmed by that as well, right? And so it benefits a lot of people when we change some of these structures. And so I think that, and I think having community of other people who also understand your struggle is so important, because otherwise you just feel really alone, and you forget that actually a lot of people are going through the same thing, and we can share that energy basically, and to get through some of these struggles.
Yeah, and really, like as we talk about the hive part in this podcast, we really talk about that greater community, right? That even if you are that solo entrepreneur, I would also make the argument that we're never just a solo entrepreneur. We can't do all the things. We do have a team or a community around us, and in your work now in the workplace, how do you see community in the workplace? Do you see cultures and companies creating these cultures that have their own community within their structure of their business, or is it really being left to a free-for-all?
Yeah, so one of the expressions, there's a quote about culture will eat strategy for breakfast, which is that the culture of your company or organization is going to have a much bigger impact than whatever Q3 goals or quarterly goals you have. And so we really do try to help organizations be intentional about their culture. One of the types of cultures that is always beneficial is a culture of psychological safety. And so that's really the ability to show up as a flawed human. And, it's kind of like we describe it as it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to speak up and disagree. And I'm forgetting the last one, but it'll come back to me. And so that's about, can I be a flawed human and still, am I going to be humiliated or critiqued all day long at work? Those kinds of environments, again, employees flourish and employers do better, right? So when you can create a culture of psychological safety, which just is really about like, hey, we're humans and humans make mistakes. And I always say, let's try to make new mistakes rather than repeating the same mistake. But let's plan for mistakes, right? And that I can show up as my true self, kind of true flawed self, and the different like aspects of myself, then that is predictive of like the highest functioning teams. Teams function better. It doesn't matter who's in the team. It's about whether they create psych safety or not. And that's really a sense of somebody gets me and somebody's got my back. It also benefits the employer because you have more effective teams, you have less turnover, you have better job satisfaction. So again, one of those things that actually benefits everybody. Not about being nice to people, not about dropping all your expectations. Actually, it's very much about still having expectations, but recognizing that people do the 2-step forward, 1 step back to get to those expectations, and how do we support them in that journey. One of the things we talked about, how do people get into positions of leadership, and often they're like the best widget maker, and so then they become in a leadership position. But once you get into leadership, it's actually about managing people and not widgets anymore. And so many leaders are put into these positions without the skill set to manage people, and it becomes like the biggest part of their job, and certainly the most stressful part of their job. That's one of the things we focus on in particular in our leadership training, is basically people management skills. And younger generations, again, they bring their whole self to work, right? They are all there, and they expect companies to care about their mental health. And so it leaves a lot of managers really struggling, because I think many of them genuinely want to do the right thing, but don't have the skill set to do that. And so that's one of the things that we focus on in our training, is how do we help leaders develop those skills? Again, there's a lot of science we can help, we can use to help them make those changes in their own behavior and in how they're interacting with other people. And again, makes everyone feel better, right? It makes the managers feel better because they feel more confident in being able to handle these things that show up. HR is happier because they're not bumping up these problems to HR all the time, right? And the employees are also, happier. And so we are, we say that our purpose in our company is to make less soul-sucking workplaces, right? And what's the most soul-sucking part for for managers, it's people, people not doing the things you want them to do. And the most soul sucking part for employees is having a terrible manager. And so by doing this leadership training, again, we hope to create environments where people can thrive. We always want to empower the individual to be able to do things to improve their well-being, but we also want them to be in environments where they also have a chance of being healthy.
I love that, because I think there's so many layers in a company that that are complex, and it's not always did the person who's now been thrown into this leadership role, like you said, has that training, and that actually can, really that can change a culture within a company very, very quickly, very quickly.
Yeah.
So, and I love, I always described, like, I left my corporate job because it was sucking my soul.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
made the change,
Yeah.
and it was, I recognized, like, I couldn't keep on the path I was on. And that's what led me into entrepreneurship, along with a few other factors in our lives that were happening, but I had changed. So it wasn't the same satisfaction. So what would you say to someone, if what would be your tip for them to help to make their own, what they can control to make their own workplace less soul sucking?
Yeah, for sure. So, you can make psychological safety with one other human, right? That's all you need. And so it's possible you have a crappy manager. It's possible you have a team that's difficult and you don't necessarily have control over that. One, again, think about what you're contributing, right? What are you contributing to that environment? And is it, reinforcing all the kind of destructive things that of a low psych safety environment, or are you trying to contribute, psych safe behaviors and attitudes to the environment? And you can make it with one other person. And again, it's that sense of like, this person gets me, this person's got my back, right? Sometimes that's also a reason to change jobs, is that it's not psychologically safe and it is like, sucking your soul. And there's, no job that's worth that. There's no job that's worth your health, your well-being. So it is often a reason people choose to change jobs. And again, we encourage people to do that being value driven, not just trying to get away from something bad. So values are always about moving towards something good, not getting away from something bad. So if you're just trying to leave a stressful environment, you might end up in an equally stressful environment in the next place you go to, right?
True.
You want to be mindful, intentional, thoughtful about what are my values, how am I trying to express them, and will this job help move me towards closer or further away from my values, so that you are intentionally trying to get somewhere where you think you have a better chance of expressing your values, right? You may or may not, succeed at that. Values, again, because it's not about the finish line, it's about how you get there. So, for example, one of my colleagues had a client who decided to quit his job and move across the country to be closer to his parents. So he does all this stuff, it's a lot of work to like move across the country, and he gets there, and within a month of getting there, both his parents die. And so you could easily be like, oh, that wasn't worth it. That didn't, and so that wasn't good, kind of thing. And obviously, but it wasn't about, he didn't have control over that, right? Every step along the way was him expressing his values of connection with them, about the fact that they mattered to him. It wasn't just the outcome of moving there, right? It wasn't just that one moment or goal of moving. It was all the steps that led up to that. And so even if the outcome doesn't turn out the way you want it to, you were being value driven the whole way along. And that's what you have control over. And if you were genuine in that, you still take that as a win, even if it didn't work out the way you thought. So you might think this new workplace or this new department, is, going to be better, and you followed your values and you get there and it turns out it's not, or you get there and the manager changes and again changes the entire culture when you get a new manager, right? That's not a failure. It's not that it didn't work, right? If you were expressing your values, it did work. That is the point of it. And we don't control these outcomes. And so bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. And that's not something we like to think about, right? But it really does happen in life. And so the part you control is how you're getting through that, right? How you're expressing your values.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So to maybe wrap, and I like to kind of leave our listeners with a bit of a journal prompt or just something to sort of ponder if they're listening to this in the car. And I think actually where we've got to circle back to is, what would you say would be one question or prompt to really like ponder about when it comes to values?
Yeah. So, for sure, a values question is like, who do I want to be? Right?
Mhm,
How do I want to show up?
mhm.
Another good one is, what do I have control over? The answer is your behavior. So go looking for your behavior, right? We often come up with solutions that are about other people changing or other people doing things differently, right? But it's often a question. And again, values are things you want to think about all the time, right? It's not, I have them as pop up reminders on my phone to remind myself of like who I'm trying to be and how I'm trying to show up. And that's the basis of it is, who do you want to be? How do you want to show up, right? What kind of behaviors would you need to do to express those values? Because that's how we actually express values, is through our behavior. And so asking yourself that frequently, right? Often
Yes.
about, how do I want to show up here? What matters to me? Who do I want to be? How do I want to contribute? How do I want to care about people? How do I want to connect with people? But it's about, how do I want to show up?
And that's really, like you said, that's what we can control. And that's where we have a choice,
Yeah.
right? Is how do we choose to show up?
Yeah.
And I also would challenge, if you're not getting maybe that result in what you think, I think sometimes it's okay to go back and audit, like, how am I showing up in a way that actually is, being the change that you want to see?
Right.
And, you
And
know,
sometimes, that you can see it in how other people react, and sometimes you
you
can't, right?
can't.
Sometimes
It's
you can do
true.
all the right things and behave exactly the way you want to, or even the way your psychologist told you, and it doesn't mean the other person changed,
That's
right?
right.
It doesn't mean
We
that
can't control. That's
can't
right.
control other people. And so that's not the marker of change, is how other people treat you,
Yes.
right? Definitely go find people who treat you the way you want to be treated, right?
Yes.
Rather than hoping to change people into people
Yes.
who treat you well. And again, you'll go over a whole bunch of rumble strips to try to do that. That's not an easy thing, but it's definitely a worthwhile thing to do. And again, there's no end point of that, right? Somebody
Yeah.
who treated you well can start to not treat you well. And so, again, a values question about relationships is, who do I want to be in this relationship? Does this relationship help me show up as a person I want to be? Right? What kind of qualities would I need in somebody else that would help me, express my values, as opposed to this, like, what do you want in a partner, and a checklist of things that you like? That is very much what you want to get from life, right? A value driven question is, how do I want to show up? How do I want to create, psych safety in a partnership, in a relationship, which is really about secure attachment in a romantic relationship or an intimate relationship. And so, if you're willing to be flexible again in how you express your values, that there's lots of different ways to express your values, there's not just one way, then they're always available to you. They are always available to you.
Yeah. So good. And I really, challenge you to ask that question in all areas, be it in workplace, at home, in your business, if you're an entrepreneur. And, I leave time in my schedule every quarter to go back and reevaluate these
Yeah.
things, because we change, we grow, we experience new things,
Yeah.
and our
Yeah.
values can evolve with us.
Yeah.
So,
And you can either move towards or away from your values. And there will always be times when we move away, right? That's just like
yes,
part of being a human. And
yes.
so sometimes you want to just be intentional about moving away, which is like, no, I'm going to eat ice cream for dinner on purpose, even though I know it's not good for me, right? Versus like, oh no, I ended up eating ice cream for dinner, and then blaming yourself for,
Right.
just like enjoy the ice cream for dinner and recognize you're going to have a bad night because you ate sugar for dinner,
Ate sugar for
right?
dinner.
But we'll always make away moves. Our goal is just to move a little bit more towards than away, just a
Uh,
little bit more towards than away.
Love that. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dayna. This was a great conversation. You've got so much wisdom. We are going to include all the ways that you can get in contact with Dr. Dayna. Doing some really incredible work in her company in leadership. She's changing cultures with skills and some real takeaways and actionable steps that we can apply to companies and businesses. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you back here on the ARC Hive Podcast very soon.
Thank you.